Hello and welcome to Tremaine Sci-Fi Hour. Today we are discussing modern politics and how it influences sci-fi, and also political systems and a great deal of other things. But first, we want to mention that we have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, and as you would probably expect, they're called Tremaine Sci-Fi Hour, and you should go check them out because they currently have no one on them. But let's start. So, Jag.
Kia ora.
Jag, what's your favourite political system in sci-fi? What's your favourite one to see, and what's your favourite one to, have destroyed in front of your eyes?
Okay. I'm not sure I've read a lot of sci-fi where the political system itself matters. I think it's some of my favorite sci-fi, and there's been some sort of monarchy that often gives a lot of room for play. You can do interesting things in a monarchy, or in systems like monarchies. Obviously, I've been reading The Divide by J.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
and that's a sort of pseudo monarchy. There's multiple royal families who are part of a council, but really it's monarchical, perhaps hegemonical. When you get something like a vanilla democracy, it's quite often just a background thing,
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's not often a lot of interesting events happening within that sort of system in sci-fi.
Right. So you'd say, and would you say that's a general fiction thing, where if it's not like a government system we consider to be dangerous or obsolete, that there's no conflict in. I mean, because in Star Wars we see the Republic is very much at the center stage in the prequels, at least, for where the story's coming from. Because without the failings of democracy and the failings of safeguards and the time of emergencies that begin to unfold, we don't see the Empire rise. If you see what I'm saying.
I think Star Wars is a good example for that because when I look at the Star Wars story, I see like the Republic where not much can happen, so they're always like you get like the whole trade embargo and stuff, and you're like, this is not interesting. This is not what I want in a action space opera. And then it switches to this empire, and you're like, okay, cool. There's a monolith. There's not going to be these council meetings that really just wear me down. So
You're a
yeah,
Philistine, Jack.
these these less than ideal real world political systems work great in fiction because it does open that space for conflict. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but I wouldn't say. Well,
Mm?
well, no. This is because I played the game, the Skywalker saga recently, so I watched the movies again, and I have to say most of it is not trade embargoes and politics. It's just that the action sometimes gets cut up by the trade embargoes and politics. And I suppose it also brings out the inner politic nerd in me that love to see the inner workings of how, like, a republic that was not working for anyone because it had basically become gummed up and its machinery had not been able to operate properly. And then it's sort of how Caesar used the time of emergency with Pompey and and then later the others, Augustus Caesar used the time of emergency with Mark Antony to seize more power. I do enjoy that sort of thing because I know that I think Stalin did it, Hitler did it, a lot of politicians that became very, very powerful and very tyrannical afterwards, used that same system of panicking the public, populism, and then taking over. And so I enjoyed that aspect of Star Wars, but I know that because you're old, you would have seen it when it was coming out, and it probably wasn't what you wanted to see as a child.
Sure.
We'll pretend that wasn't a dig. Okay. So, I mean, what else is there, really? Because there's what? So, we've seen republics in Star Wars, we've seen monarchies, we've seen empires. But, so in Foundation, we saw what? We saw, like, the start of a technocracy with the encyclopedias ruling. Would you say they were a technocracy?
Um, I mean, it's hard to say what it ended up as
Oh, yeah, yeah.
in practice, but I think that was. It seems to have been the intent when they were making the system, though. That was the goal, and then, what happens, happens.
Yeah, the idea that what do you call it?
All political systems get twisted by those with power and ambition, so.
Yeah, yeah.
Money.
Well, money is don't diss money, and we want money. No,
Are we talking specifically about Star Wars right now? Like,
no, we're
or
talking about
oh, okay.
Foundation, which is Asimov. But you can bring in any other. I mean, what else? I mean,
Because I was
It
thinking
kind of
at
applies to all of it.
at some point in Star Wars, isn't there like a diarchy as well, where there's like competition between Darth Vader and the Emperor at some point, where they're both like,
yeah. Mm, it's so that's not really in canon. It's in I think it's
oh,
in
okay,
Legends, but it's this idea that Darth Vader was working against the Emperor by trying to form his own army. That idea is more in line with the Sith rule of two, which is the idea that the apprentice always tries to overthrow the master. But if you look at the movies, it's not meant to be that way. Just because Darth Vader's meant to be broken, essentially, is that he he is now just a servant of the empire, a servant of the emperor, and a servant of the
okay.
dark side. But yeah, that's
So if you see him as a servant, it's not. But if you see him as a like a counterpart,
yeah. If you see
it
him
would
as a
be.
if so, like the idea is that Darth Vader's trying to form armies and he's trying to position himself to rule the galaxy, and the story of Anakin is meant to be more that he tries to make a deal with the devil and then loses everything in the process. And then
Yeah.
when he finds his son, he realizes he finally has opportunity again to redeem himself, and then doesn't know how to deal with it. And then there's that whole atonement with the father and monomyth that we will get into in another episode. Monomyths. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? So yeah, I mean, Joda, is there any sci-fi that you see that maybe you? I mean, you brought up Mad Max when we were talking about
Yeah.
So
I mean, those are just like full blown like anarchy based out of scarcity. And if it's not anarchy, it's more of like what is it called? Like maybe tribalism, where
right.
like there's like small factions that rule themselves.
Well,
That's always interesting for me to see, just because like that's again, once it's like, again, it's sci-fi, but like the world's ending, so who knows how what might happen. Um, so like Mad Max and stuff, I was always interested in me to see how like people in full scarcity would react,
yeah,
even if it is
Post-apocalyptic
sci-fi.
really, it's got some really interesting areas to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and like they're like bringing it to like current day. There are like like countries that are on the brink of like water wars and stuff. So like that kind of atmosphere is currently happening. So it's really interesting to see how it is portrayed in sci-fi that's already been created without knowing that that was going to happen.
Hmm. I think we've mentioned before that we really need to, at some point, get into things like Native American sci-fi, because they've experienced an apocalypse essentially. So
Yeah.
they've really got something interesting to say on the matter. At least to the extent that I've looked into it, I've been like, "Oh wow, this is
Yeah, I would love to see
a thorough
that
viewpoint."
content and like hear more about it.
Yeah, I think we planned that, but then a lot of stuff happened, and then we
Yeah.
had to postpone it. So we will get to that eventually. So if you are interested in that, go to the Facebook page and the Instagram page, and Tremaine Sci-Fi, and join us so that you can see it again. There's also an interview. There are also interviews coming out that have already come out because this episode's coming out later. Anyway, so
We have to do that
There's
because I'm
also
personally interested as well.
have we fully like moved away from only sticking to like sci-fi within sci-fi limits or like hard sci-fi?
So yeah, yeah. Go ahead. We can break the format.
Okay,
if you
because
like.
a lot of like vampire content has the idea of like elders ruling the society.
Right, like an elder council.
What is it called? Hold on, I have a list here of things I wanted to talk about. A gerontocracy, one of those. So I love seeing those fall. That is one of my favorite things ever. Like especially coming from like the United States and like where it seems like our generation is constantly fighting with older generations. That is like and we have an ideology that's always repeated to us that's like respect your elders. So I personally love seeing movies, content, books, whatever, where that is overthrown.
Right. And I mean, I think the idea that, well, actually, this is something I wanted to bring up, which is one of my own personal favorites because it's in the book I'm writing, is this idea that how magic, in some way, you know how in Harry Potter or in Star Wars or in these places where certain people have the magic and some don't?
Yeah.
That idea. In my head, that would not end in a end with a what do you call it? Would not end with an apocalypse. To me, that would end with essentially what we have now, with people being moved around as pawns. But it would also have, I think, so. This is something that Darth Sidious talks about in Legends, which is this idea that maybe he predicted the coming of the Yuuzhan Vong, which were essentially like the Native Americans would have felt, which is the Empire would have been there as a bulwark against the incoming, essentially European settlers. But as the Empire crumbles, that's what essentially happens: is the Yuuzhan Vong show up and massacre planets. So what I was thinking is, would it be a secret society? Would it be open rule? Would it be, what exactly do these special powers give to these groups? And it's fun to explore where that could go, because I know for the Jedi at least, they decided to stay away from politics, at least for the most part, and that was their downfall because the Sith fully embraced politics. What do you guys think what would be the outcome of magic people?
I guess all I know is like trends that I've seen in sci-fi. Like there's like it's funny because I bringing up vampires. Like I just watched the Blade series, and it's pretty much there's always going to be that one group that's like these people don't have power. We should rule them. Like they're the ants to our like powerful and mighty like magical beings. And then there's the people who are like, no, like we should coexist and like maybe not wipe them out. And then the whole time there's this like unseen group of the same people who have all the power that are just ruling everything in like and it can pretty much it's kind of like current discourses where like people it's like people if you really take magic and put power there like that already happens in current
Yeah, for example,
society.
the ruling class of lizards, they They welcome to Tremane's conspiracy hour. The ruling class of lizards, led by Queen Elizabeth, Lizardbeth. No, So yeah, I see what you're saying. So there's sort of like this idea that we replace magic with power. We essentially get what we have, which is a what would we call
It's like a
it?
few people, a few people who have a lot more power than people think that they do, and are like
And instead of
silently
them, instead of being,
or overtly ruling everyone else
and
without
instead of them being cool like wizards with like swords and stuff, Jeff Bezos. Um,
yeah.
they're a bald loser. Yeah, exactly.
Lizard
The
people.
lizard people. Lizard people would be cooler than that.
Yeah, but like even like because you can see that in like the Harry Potter movies too, where you have like the standard wizards who are just like trying to like live their lives and like coexist with humans as much as possible. Not as much as possible, but on like a base level. Then you have like Voldemort and his clan that are like, we have to rule everything, destroy the world.
I don't
And
get the
then you
destroy the
have
world part, but I get the rule everything.
and then you have like the like Dumbledore and his crew that are just silently ruling everything until like they lose power from like another party that is also trying to silently run everything. So like um I think that's one consistency within sci-fi content that contains a a group of people with magical power or like
Some sort.
superhuman abilities or something, um, and people without
Yeah, what are you? I
in
mean,
the same space.
You're someone who we constantly reference as widely read. So, what have you seen in terms of? I know that may not be your particular favorite. I know you prefer hard sci-fi to fun sci-fi, but have you noticed anything like that where there's a special group? Like I know that Spice and Dune makes I think it makes certain people magical, doesn't it? I haven't read the full book because
Kind of. It's used for the navigators, which lets them see glimpses of the future, which is the only way you can navigate a safe path at faster than light speed, because you literally cannot react. So
interesting.
you need to see
That's
the future to determine the safe path. And then, of course, there's people like Deb, who, or worse, the God Emperor, where I mean, it just absolutely transforms them, and it has the problem of prophecy where if you see a future, you get locked into it.
right.
This is going into like book 4 or 5 at that point, so I don't want to get too into the weeds because it's an old series, but there's still spoilers.
Right.
Anytime you
Spoilers
see,
can't ruin anything, but carry on.
anytime there's people with or without powers, it's just immediately classism or case systems. Basically, you look
Right.
at Shadowrun or any of the cyberpunk um, genre things, and you get augmented and unaugmented. With Harry Potter, you've got you know muggles and mudbloods as well as purebloods. You've got yeah, um,
I mean, so
force sensitive, not force sensitive.
but
It's
that's also based off the samurai class, isn't it? From feudal Japan was the idea that because that's what the Jedi are meant to be. Are meant to be like a class of their own, and that's quite interesting. I mean, I suppose because the way we have a bit of a simplistic view, I suppose, of how, or maybe we don't actually, of how it operates right now. But there is tiers to our society, isn't there? There's, well, I would say us, which is people who
yeah,
don't have much in the way of power. Then there are people on top of us, more people on top of us, and then it gets lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser as it gets to the top.
Yeah,
And
at least for me and you, Tremaine, we're in New Zealand, so we have different classes of
yeah,
economics, social, and political.
so I'm sort of on top of Jag, and Jag's like.
But we don't talk about that in public.
And
That's from the
Joda's
laptop.
and Joda's below us, I guess, because she's in America. No, wait, no, she's in America, so she's in like a different tier system, like on top of. This is getting weird.
Well,
Let's move on.
Well, you didn't need to do that, Tremaine. I suppose the point where I was going there is we don't have actual formalized case like, say, India used to. We can say, oh, no, this person's upper class, but we don't have
It's not
someone
enforced.
it's not they're not Brahmin cased or something. Whereas in sci-fi and fiction, as soon as you put in powers and stuff, immediately you get those issues. In the family trees, there's people who can teleport and people who can't teleport. And immediately that's it. In group, out group. We're better than you.
Right, which is not completely off the. They are kind of better than you at that point. But
aren't wizards better than normal people?
Yeah,
they can do magic.
Yeah, exactly, they are.
It's based on your definition of
exactly.
better.
But that is how it reflects, I suppose, supremacy and this idea of racial supremacy. There's this idea that there's a whole class of people that are betters than the others, and we won't get too far into that because it's very choppy waters at the moment. But well, forever it will be.
I'd say it's fair when race actually means something. If we're talking race like these people are centaurs, then yes, there's a real difference.
But you see what I mean, though? It's a way of them extrapolating this idea that, okay, so these people have... But it is sort of what we were talking about before with Joda, is this idea that some people have power in our society that others don't. And there's a sort of class/race that exists in that sort of idea. And so anyone who challenges that idea is seen as... You see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
seen as a problem.
Power likes power, and power likes to stay in power.
Yeah.
And power begets power.
I
so
did.
I
did watch a series on Hulu recently that was it's called Motherland, I think, Fort Salem. And it's about witches and non-witches interacting. So without giving too much of spoilers, just the backstory of the show, it's the U.S. government during the Salem witch trials made a deal with one of the last witches left that in the U.S. that they would keep her alive if she served their government.
So that's a smart.
So it shows the timeline throughout history of building a pretty much special forces military based on witches, who have magical power, but are not the ruling majority.
Right.
Which I thought was an interesting dynamic that that we don't see often.
I suppose because if you think about it, there is a limit to how much these magical beings can do to a degree. If you look at in-universe times where they've nearly been eradicated. That's pretty...
Right.
Yeah, I suppose there is a degree of... Could the majority just rise up and slaughter them en masse? If they can die.
Right. So if that's another thing too, because it's kind of similar again to current discourses, because once again, they may have the ruling power may have money and resources, but they're there's a small few compared to the majority that is ruled over that may that doesn't think they have the power to do it.
I can't remember who said this, or even if it's true, which is how the internet seems to go now. If you, there was this idea that these bunkers that the super rich are buying, and well, I don't know if that's even true, but this
It
idea
is.
that the security
Like end of the
forces,
world bunkers.
yeah, this idea that
Yeah, that's
security
happening.
forces would have to be placated somehow. And like, how do you convince security forces not to just turn the guns against you and go, "Well, this is mine now"? And that's sort of that was the headlet. I think that was Frankie Boyle actually. So I probably shouldn't be saying that, but it's this idea that people, not that Frankie Boyle's not good. He's just a comedy character, but still, he he made the point that you know, if they really wanted to, if you have guns and other people don't, it's kind of unless they can
It's a mindset.
unless you run out of bullets, yeah. But that's what I guess they were talking. I guess that's what we're talking about with this idea of could the majority in Harry Potter, for example, if the wizarding world was opened, I think we could take them. Um,
Well, actually, there is in universe explanations on this, and the wizards lost.
ah,
That's why they're
Oh,
secretive.
really?
Yeah.
oh,
Interesting. I didn't know that.
oh
That's
yeah,
awesome.
Muggle power.
There's been wizard versus muggle wars, and the wizards go, the killing curse or whatever. Haha, I killed one person and it destroyed a little bit of my soul. And then
a human
the
guitar Gatling
cowboys
gun.
just pulled out guns. Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
was a Gatling gun.
And they're like, this doesn't hurt me.
Yeah, so it's like amongst all of this dynamic of there being multiple levels of power, there's also mindsets within that are holding people in those places rather than being able to move freely. Like I understand that there's like for in real life there's a lot of things in place that are keeping people in where they are. I'm not saying like your mindset, like if you're lazy, that means you can never get out of the lower class. I'm saying like a full class mindset over individual mindsets. Like
Right.
if every single person in a world that is magic versus non-magic is like they have magic, we'll never win, then that kind of is like the thing.
You
And then
do
if
restrict
if
I think
yourself.
people
you just
with
got
and the
JK. Sorry.
people with magic are enforcing that ideology somehow by saying by like every once in a while showing their power by say like
I
killing
think you just
someone
got
with
put
magic.
JK. I think you just got JK Rowling put on the FBI watch list. Anyway, so I mean, yeah, that's
Is she not already there?
all artists are. Once they get enough. So I think something we did want to talk about, just briefly, we will talk about post-scarcity communism because it is an idea that was in the original part of this podcast, but they got lost because we didn't do a very good job of it. So, post-scarcity communism essentially is the idea that after we realize, hey, we've got everything we need, do we really need this hierarchy above us or below us or whatever? And then there's a flattening out of the hierarchy. So exploring that, now we'll ignore the obvious things where people go, communism doesn't work, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. We're ignoring that for the time being because this is a thought experiment. And so for all intents and purposes, communism is the idea that everyone in a society would exist without a government, which is proposed by the end goal of communism, and that they would exist with each to what is it, Jake? For each to his own. No.
From each as they can to each as they need.
Yes. Okay. I think that's something similar. So that is the idea of communism. Post scarcity is where we no longer need to work, or we no longer need to. We don't want for anything. If we want food, we can have it. If we want electricity, we can have it. If we want Wi-Fi, we can have it. There's no scarcity in the world. There's no have and have-nots. There's just haves. And so I guess that is something to play with, because there is a way of having that world without having the idea of total equality, which we talked about before the recording. This idea that I think it's in Cyberpunk, which I keep referencing, but I don't actually know. Is this idea that there is no scarcity, but there is manufactured scarcity by by uh,
Corporations.
by corporations, yeah. So the corporations manufacture the scarcity in order to perpetuate their existence and their power over the lower classes. And I think, Jag, we brought it up in the Lost recording that there was a story that you read where certain people could live for longer periods of time, but the machine. Remember that?
Oh, the movie In Time.
Right.
2011. It was pretty good. Highly rated. So at least in that movie, the idea is at the age of, I think, 25, your timer starts. You have 1 year to live, and you work not for food or money. You work for time. And so the lower classes will work in a factory, and they'll be living day to day. Quite literally, they'll have 24 hours left. They'll go to the factory, and they'll work, and ultimately the goal is to gain more time than it costs. But it means you can never take a sick day. You know, a lot of people rely on charity of others, but there is this idea in the movie, and I'm not. It doesn't explain everything, so I don't know if it's possible for everyone to live forever, and they just require this scarcity so that people will work, or if there is actually a limit to time, and so the wealthy who have, they might have a century on their arm at any moment, and then in a safe they'll have a millennium stored up. But that time does have to be taken from others. It's a zero-sum game,
Right.
essentially. Can't remember exactly which way that actually went, but it's an interesting idea. Yeah, once there's all the food and shelter that everyone needs, what do you work for?
That
I mean, for me, it's
um
self-actualization, right? But
right, but that's implying that our only purpose is to work.
Right, and that's something that we've talked about before on the podcast that may not necessarily be true. It may be that we find out that actually our purpose is art, or our purpose is ambition, or our purpose is just to exist. And
Right,
once
or
we
we can just we're allowed to. I feel like this is like getting into a um
utopia
this is
idea,
more
no,
philosophical.
it's more philosophical, I would say, because like
who cares?
living in a capitalist society, like where we are told like our only purpose is to work. Like that's where our value is. So like if we have a society that is post scarcity where we don't have to, then that is the people who are in power don't want us to have that, because then it like or don't want us to like work towards that, because or not because but by telling us, well, then what are you going to work for?
Right, and
So
that's
if
the
you
idea
have a
is
post-scarcity society, like I like the idea of you, like Tremaine, you saying that the like, what if we find art, or what if we find
oh
a
yeah,
different purpose or something?
there's
But
I
like it
mean
could just be there isn't one.
oh yeah, that's what I said. There could be nothing. There could just be child rearing. There could just be the fact that you can sit near a stream and just sort of, yeah, let the
That's my
world float
dream.
by you. What, to
I
sit
would
by a
love to do
stream?
that. Just to
Yeah.
sit by a stream and just like sit there and not have to think about anything else.
So I think in that context, it was that the ruling class need people to be busy,
Right. Yeah.
otherwise they've got time
to
think about these things.
Yeah, and that's the case when industrialization was going on. The idea that at some point we would reach an apex where there would be no need for people to work in these factories. What do we do with those people?
Yeah, there's a reason why certain power structures have phrases like, the devil finds work for idle hands.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and
They don't want you to be idle because you'll think.
Don't think.
The ruling class is the ruling class because of the exploitation of the working class. So,
Commie.
they need that working class to exist and stay working
exactly.
to stay where they are.
Exploitable. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Whereas
that begs the question. Well, that in my head somehow ties me back to something that Tremaine was saying earlier. Like, is post-scarcity economy, is that communism?
Or is
if we make it communism?
I suppose.
Because the way that you described it, there was no ruling power, but communism is described by essentially distributed.
Yeah, so
equal resources.
In Marxist theory, the idea is that the idea of communist socialism, which is an interesting phrase to use there, Tremaine. The idea is that the idea of a state that was communist would eventually lead to communism, which would be the dissolution of the state and then the control of... Basically, the idea of the state was to condition people, and they thought it would only need 60 years, which clearly wasn't going to work. But the idea was that there was an inevitable revolution coming, which I think a lot of people believe today. And there was a need for a state to exist that would operate for the people.
So there would be some central. You're saying there would be some central power.
There would be a centrally
planned economy that
the planned economy would exist for a period of time until it withered away. Essentially, I think that's what Lenin proposed in State and Revolution, is the idea of the withering away of the state, and that then he goes on to say that fascism is capitalism in decay or in its dying throes. But one of those is this idea.
Yeah, you're right. You're right in saying that.
Yeah. So when this idea that in these communist worlds, the idea was the state was never the end goal. The end goal of the state was the idea, which is a very convoluted way of saying that.
Yeah.
But
if I can try to put it simpler, so communism has a set of stages, and the end one is dissolution of the state.
Yeah.
And then what would it move into after that?
Nothing.
Anarchism?
That's the end goal. No, that's the end goal. Is the idea? It's not exactly anarchism, because anarchism, I can't remember the exact. I can't remember what the problem was.
It'd be a form of anarchism.
It would be a form of anarchism, but it would be there was a schism between. I think there was a proposal by some anarchists saying that there shouldn't be a state, and then there was the communists who were saying we need one to become a no state, and there was a whole schism between.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so because when you were talking about people finding a way to create scarcity like that, but without the state being there, it kind of sounded like anarchism to me. But so I don't know, because I feel like that post scarcity, everyone wants to go towards that, but is there content that shows the in between? I've seen content that's post scarcity where everyone's happy and everyone has essentially what we would describe as no worries, and then I've seen post scarcity content where people have taken control and create scarcity.
Right.
But is there that in between where you see the process of that scarcity being created?
I can think of examples.
Can you provide them?
Yes, I can think of them.
Because we see Star Trek as an existing content that is post scarcity but has created scarcity in some form. Right. So is there a something that's before that?
Go on,
Sure.
Jake.
So Rudy Rucker has the Ware Tetralogy, which the first book, Software, is definitely, it's pre-post scarcity. It's before post scarcity society, and then as it moves through the books, it does have the creation of a post scarcity society, and then also things that happen within a post scarcity society. So
You're like the perfect person for like recommendations. I have a list of all the things that Jag has suggested to read.
I
I've got-
highly recommend the Ware Tetralogy. It does have recreational drug use, if that's something that you
yeah.
don't like to read about, if that can send you in bad directions. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it's not too strong on themes, and it is free. It
Okay,
was
so
distributed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative License. You can just get it. It's free.
I love that. I like free things. So you're saying that it starts so it starts in scarcity, or it starts like
Yeah.
right towards the beginning of people going into post
So
scarcity.
Software is set in the year 2020.
Oh man,
Oh.
imagine that year.
But was written in 1982, so yes. But it is definitely
40
there
years
is
old.
still scarcity. It's somewhat socialist, but
I mean, most
again, a
most
1980s
creatives,
take
most
on
creatives
it.
tend to be.
Yeah, and then and
And the ones
so
that aren't tend to be very different.
and then when it ends, it's in like what we see in Star Trek, where it's post scarcity with created scarcity. So there's an in between there. There's
Yeah.
software, wetware, freeware, and realware.
Yeah. So railware is definitely. Well, I suppose it just changes what scarcity is, in a sense.
Interesting.
But it's definitely beyond the scarcity of physical matters like food and shelter. It becomes scarcity of creativity and
Interesting.
identity.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking into this.
Yeah, so and then I suppose we do need
It's
to.
definitely Philip K. Dick, sort of William Gibson, almost surrealism in some ways. It's fun.
It's fun. It's fun.
Jag saying something is fun kind of scares me, and I'm into it.
It scares everyone, don't worry. It's just like Jag saying, well, it's time. That would suddenly, you would suddenly go, uh-oh. What's it time for?
I don't know. The Ware Tetralogy is a what's like it's like an electronic acid trip. It's beautiful.
I love that. That's like my whole aesthetic, so I'm ready for it.
Electronics acid trip. Oh god.
What
Okay.
is there's a term, I just found the term for that. Oh shit. Like synthwave, I think is what it was called, where it's just like tech stuff, but if you're on an acid trip.
Okay.
Just
Love it.
that's how I imagine Alan Turing or like some of the, I can't remember any other computer nerds, just doing acid and just going, all right, let's create the shit, and then it's just sort of, I'm imagining techno music blasting like in the 1950s, and then just going da 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 da, and they're just assembling things anyway.
I need to find I'm gonna make it my goal to find movies where that's like it seems like that happened.
Yeah. So what we have, I suppose, left to talk about is the actually, I need to ask what laissez-faire capitalism is.
Oh, laissez-faire.
Laissez-faire.
It's very hands-off. It's the sort of capitalism where free market capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
Like a true free market?
Yeah.
Or like the free market
Laissez-faire
that they
is
think America has?
no,
Okay.
much less regulation and
Okay.
government involvement.
Oh
So
God.
laissez-faire is French for allow to do, and so laissez-faire capitalism is if you want to sell poisoned infant formula, you should be allowed to.
Right.
Like, you, no one should be allowed to stop you. It's ultimate free market capitalism, and it is
Terrifying.
definitely not what I'm in favor of.
It is terrifying. Um,
The idea is it would self-regulate. So if you sold poisoned baby formula, people would stop buying it.
or their
Your
babies would be
company
dead.
would, well, yeah, and so your company would collapse, and you shouldn't be bailed out either.
Which then leads to you creating a monopoly of baby formula, then turning it poison, and then they have no choice. Which is
Yeah.
probably a very simplistic way of going, that doesn't work.
It'd
Let's
be,
move on.
yeah, monopolistic corporatocracy, and eventually you'd lead into a world similar to that found in Jennifer Government by Max Brooks. Which, oh boy, another book recommendation, I guess, Jennifer Government.
Go on.
It's sort of the end result of current American style corporatocracy.
Oh, great. It's just going to make me spiral.
It probably would. The world is a bit depressing. It follows people who are against it, I suppose. So it's slightly optimistic, but it is a crapsack world. People's names. Jennifer Government, the titular character, is called that because her name is Jennifer and she works for the government. And your last name is your employer.
Creative. Oh, what?
Yeah.
That does sound like something that would happen here, to be honest.
It's very feudalistic.
Baker and
awfulness.
Smith and I don't know how
Well,
many
we're sort of-
Smiths.
Let's start the countdown of I moved to New Zealand.
I feel like we're sort of heading that way again, and let's just say, like, the Smiths were Smiths, the Bakers were Bakers, and we're sort of heading that way again. I look at my phone now, and I see Tim Landlord, Sam Plummer. These aren't their last names.
You are right. Yeah, like that's what we put in our
These aren't
contacts.
their last names.
It's what they do. That's how
That's how history will remember them.
Wow, we are pretty much already there. Wow.
Yeah, like Jag podcaster. Jag chain operator, yeah.
I won't say what you are in my phone.
I believe it's Gondleberry, isn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Max Brooks can be a little bit depressing in that the worlds he envisions aren't nice places.
But
they're
world
realistic.
he is in. Because the world he is in is not a nice place.
Yeah. Like most science fiction, it's derivative of real world situations.
Yeah, so one other thing I wanted to bring up was so we were going to talk about super weapons, but there's not much point. So something I thought about just then was the difference between a super weapon that can destroy things and a super weapon that could just effectively destroy society. So I can't remember I should have gotten the book from my shelf when I knew we were re-recording this, but it's a short story by Asimov. There's a machine that can look back 120 years into the past, but it can from 120 to the present. From that period of time can be looked at. The machine is hidden and kept secret because they don't want people to actually look back and realize, oh my God, my husband's cheating on me, or oh my God, my wife looked at that guy for like 40 seconds, or she's having a conversation with her ex, or whatever.
Yeah, a limited omnipotence would be a very dangerous thing and socially destructive for sure.
So that's the idea of that. I would call that a super weapon. The idea that anything that you have done could then be used against you and have real social impact. And that's what we talked about last time when we didn't save the recording.
I feel it still requires people to have the power to act on the information.
It does, but I think we know people will.
I
Wait,
think
sorry, I was zoned out a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. So, you saying that this weapon can look back into time and then pull something that can be used against you?
It's not a weapon. It's essentially, imagine if you could look through a telescope and see wherever you want 120 years or 10 years or 5 minutes ago in the past. Anywhere. So you could look at missile installations, you could look at your partner at a coffee shop, you could look at anything between state secrets to what your grandfather did before he died. And those things, basically that information shouldn't belong to people. It should belong to the past. It shouldn't ever be looked at again.
Okay, yeah.
And that's the idea. So the idea would be, is that a super weapon? Because I'm arguing here that...
Depends on whose hands it's in, I would say.
The idea is it's in everyone's hands.
Okay, then yes.
Is the idea that you can't really stop people from... Once it's out there, you can't stop people from making it again. You can't stop people from using it. You can't stop... it's the idea of abstinence for drug use. The idea that if we ban something, people will stop using it. That doesn't work because people will still find a way to get it. And it's the same with this machine, is the idea that once it's out there, and you cannot stop what it will do.
Yeah, I think I said this in the artificial intelligence episode, but I'm a firm believer that anything in the hands of power that can be used as a weapon will be used as a weapon.
Right.
So I agree that it is a super weapon.
And Jag, I just can't see someone... it does require someone to act on it. I do agree with that. But...
Yeah, if I have access to this and I can find out, objective truths about things, that still requires me to do stuff in order to, utilize that information. So I'd say it's a sort of omnipotent accessory, and it can be attached to anything. If it's attached to a state's power, they can use that to find out everyone who's working against them, and then they have to use their own power to round them up and kill them.
Well, that wasn't where I was coming from with the super weapon aspect. My super weapon aspect is the idea that it would collapse society completely without firing a shot.
See, you've managed to stump me a little, because I know I have examples of... I just can't bring them to mind, where there's been things where it's like something has happened and then everyone has just agreed it hasn't. Like, who was that Prime Minister who got eaten?
Oh, in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and everyone just agreed, everyone who was involved in the killing and eating of John DeWitt just agreed it didn't.
And so the same was with The Simpsons, that episode where we find out Principal Skinner is actually Tenzin Zagarian, or whatever his name is.
Exactly.
And then they just go, okay, never happened.
So I think people would come into a consensus, because it can be used against them equally, they'd just come to a consensus where this sort of thing gets ignored.
Would they, or would they get caught in a purity war, which is what I'm arguing for, which is what I'm saying is happening now. There's a social media purity war where people go, okay, you said this 5 years ago, or you said this 18 years ago. and people still use that.
But in
It
this
could.
hypothetical situation, similar to the Black Mirror episode, The Entire History of You, the quote pure side are just as vulnerable because no one
Yeah.
is actually that pure. So they go, "Oh, well, you did this," and you go, "Oh, you're targeting me, right? I'm getting my machine open and."
Right.
See, when you were in
That's a
college,
lot
you
of
used the
horse porn.
N-word a lot.
That was a lot of horse porn. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of, and even like, because nowadays someone can post like leak something that someone said 10 years ago from an anonymous account, and then you can't find out who that was. But with that weapon or that tool,
Yeah,
you could find out who that was easily.
right. But what I'm saying is the lives would already be destroyed at that point. It's mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. So that, I mean, I don't disagree
Oh,
with you
okay.
that it would end
I agree that it's
society.
mutually assured destruction. My question is, how long can... I mean,
Yeah.
we've
Okay.
been living in mutually assured destruction for
True.
80
That
years.
is true. That is true. That is true. Yeah. Yeah.
It's inevitable. It's just a matter of how long it takes.
It's
I suppose with
well,
this
that
device, how long would the Cold War
that was
last?
that was the
Yeah.
but that was the theory of the massive armies in Europe, was the idea that if Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans declared war on France, England, and Russia, it would be mutually assured destruction. What we didn't count for was America, the Russian Revolution. There are lots of things that can actually influence how these things turn out. So I suppose we don't know if this is fully there could be some people who are actually just somewhat not perfect, but somewhat just bland. Yeah. Some people who are just so boring and so pointless that they just exist as like floating through
See,
space and
like,
time.
I would just use this tool to make my life better, like find out lottery numbers and stuff easily, like,
How would you do that
or
in the
He
back?
tells you the past.
Yeah.
oh, true.
Jonah's like, fuck! I had everything planned out. I
It would allow you to manipulate
But
the
like,
stock market and
yeah,
type
I don't
trading
know.
and stuff.
I would like find out like things where like people who have lied to me, just like, so I could be like, okay, goodbye, just cut the toxicity out of my life, and also like, I guess I could easily find someone's bank password, but then I don't care. I would be stealing from Jeff Bezos all the time.
Everyone would. We'd just be looking at his bank account and just watching as it all just.
Be like, yeah, just watching it go down.
And then
It
we
would-
would have to find out what's faster: the people spending that money back into Amazon, or the people stealing the money from Amazon.
We would have to go to like fully like I don't even know how you would regulate like transactions in that society, because even if you went to cash only, you would know how to get in people's houses
I
to
mean,
find, or like,
that's a
you know,
fun
where
idea.
Yeah.
And
like
Asimov's
you'd
a
have to,
genius for making us think about it, but like, oh.
yeah,
And so basically,
because like you would know people stashing cash, you would know people stashing
oh shit,
illegal things that aren't cash.
So oh dear. So at the end of the story, moving on quickly. At the end of the story, there's, you know how in the old movies and stuff they have like that apocalyptic sort of talk at the end where they're just like, well, you've done it. It's free now. It sort of had that same thing. It sort of had that Rod Serling style of like, and this is the world now. I can't do a Rod Serling voice. I don't know why I did that. And this is the world
This
now.
is the way it was.
A world consumed by this. And Rod Serling was a genius at doing those monologues. And at the end, especially when, like for example, there's a episode of the old Twilight Zone that was done during like the 50s during the Cold War Red Scare thing. And instead of doing it as finding communists, there were aliens living amongst them. And so what happens is the power gets cut to their street, and everyone comes out onto the street like, what's going on? And slowly they devolve into, that person's an alien, that person's an alien. And basically they divide each other so quickly that they destroy each other. And at the end, there's like a alien ship outside of Earth that's just cut the power just to see what happens, or like, this is what happens. You can easily defeat them by just cutting off a necessary thing. And that was the idea of the episode, and that's what Rod Serling essentially talks about at the end, is just, do you really want your neighbours to think this of you, and do you really want to do this to your neighbours?
Or do you care?
Or do you care? Well, I mean, it depends, Jodo. Not all of us have given up on society.
Oh, that's true. I don't really think about that at all times.
Okay, so that's an hour long. Well done, everyone. Thank you again for listening for this long. Remember to check out the Facebook page and the Instagram page that we mentioned, Tremaine's Sci-Fi Hour, with either the dash or without the dash. Just look it up. And follow us and look for more information on more podcasts. And also, we are on most streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and some of the others. So go check us out on if you've found us somehow. And yeah, words.
At this point, we're not ad supported. Considering looking into a Patreon, but for now, if you do want to support the podcast, go to Tremaine's OnlyFans. You do not have to view the feet pics. Just let them know that money's for the podcast, and it will come to me and Joda.
Yeah, or you can just come directly to my Twitch.
Oh yeah, Joda also streams. End of recording.
I stream.
No, okay. Yeah, Joda streams on JJODAR. Joda.
Yes.
And she prefers to be called Jojo on the stream. Thank you for watching. Bye!